Thank you for joining me for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Are quiet quitters setting themselves up to fail? Our next guest thinks so. It could have serious consequences for a worker's career path. Let's discuss the changing face of the workplace with Howard Levitt. He is a senior partner at Levitt Sheikh employment law firm. And I can say, welcome back, Howard. It's great to have you back on the program.
Delighted to be here and to be asked again, particularly, Tony. Thank you.
For sure. So I guess the first thing we should do is just settle on definitions. What is quiet quitting?
Quiet quitting means you're ostensibly on the job. They focus on the word ostensibly, but you're not doing any work. You've essentially quit. You're pursuing other passions, but you're putting in your time so you get your paycheck at the end of the week. But there's no effort. There's no initiative. There's no involvement. There's no team. You're simply effectively quit while still clocking in.
So has this become a thing during and after the pandemic then?
It has. Partly it's because people are being asked to come back to the office and they don't want to be back in the office. And partly because some people weren't working very hard during the pandemic. And so now that they're being scrutinized more closely, they're just not working very hard and seeing what they can get away with. Well, maybe looking for other work.
Right. And of course, some aspect of this has always been the case. But I guess your point is it more widespread now? Is this what one of the issues is?
I think people have become, I say that, I'm going to give a caveat. Many people have become accustomed to not being supervised and doing other things during the workday besides working. Before, when
Right.
you're sitting at your desk, your boss walked by, you couldn't be, or they were looking at your computer, you couldn't be on the internet playing games, and you had to be actually doing something, and you're accountable. When people moved off to Mexico or to Parry Sound, Muskoka from Toronto, or wherever they might happen to have moved to, or just from their comfort of their home,
Right.
took their dog for a walk. There was no consequence. They couldn't take their dog for a walk when they were in the office. They watched a movie. They had a chat with a friend. Nobody knew the difference. If they were called, they'd respond. They'd see the call, so no one would really know. And now all of a sudden, with the scrutiny back, it's hard to get people who become lazy to work hard again. That's my experience as an employer and as a lawyer for employers.
And are you hearing about this from your client base?
Yes,
Mm.
I'm hearing more generically, Tony, how difficult it is to get people motivated and pumping out energy again and working and being productive.
And I guess part of this, let's talk a little bit about this, drill down a little bit. The employer-employee balancing act. Sometimes the employer has more authority and weight, and sometimes the employee does. Is it your sense that it's the latter right now?
Yes, no question. I don't think it's going to last, but right now, employees have had more bargaining power than they've had in 50 years, literally.
Really?
And all the jobs, by the way, are going into government. The private sector is competing hard to hire people because all the labor is being sopped up by government. 87% of new employment during the recession has been in the public sector, not the private sector. So, of course, restaurants and warehouses and small entrepreneurs just can't hire people because who could compete with government planted pension plan, high benefits, and high wages for the same jobs?
Mm.
And security, because you can't be fired being unionized effectively.
And so one of the clear factors then is, basically government hiring has taken a lot of quality people out of the workplace, and of course, most of government is still working from home too.
Right. So it's hard if you're an employer to attract employees, and that's given employees tremendous bargaining power. And the other factor in this is that a lot of people of our age have retired.
Right.
55 and up, they've retired. So the workforce is actually smaller than it was in 2019.
Interesting. We're going to continue this conversation with Howard Levitt. He is a senior partner at Levitt Sheikh employment law firm in Toronto. Quiet quitting, the changing shape of the workforce, not only in Canada, really around the world. It's a very interesting topic. We're going to get into some specifics after we hear from our sponsors, because we're still working, Howard and I, and our sponsors. So we'll hear from them, and then we'll be right back with the rest of the program. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Howard Levitt. He is a senior partner at Levitt, Sheikh employment law firm. Howard, I just want to drill down a little bit on the downsides of this quiet quitting phenomenon. I guess the alternative point of view would be, well, this is just a better work-life balance. How do you answer that reply?
Well, it may be a better work-life balance for the employee in question. I can't argue that not working is a better work-life balance than working hard and assiduously. But the reality is this: you're paid for your time. You're paid for your 8 hours a day or 7.5 hours, whatever the employment contract says, and you're expected to work for that period of time. And and you're expected to work reasonably hard, reasonably productively. And it's one thing to make an odd personal phone call. But if much of your time is devoted to other pastimes, it's effectively time theft. The employer is getting a very raw deal. Now, I see the very strong potential throughout the world of a recession. And all of a sudden, employees will not have the bargaining power that they do right now. And what will happen then? Employers turn to laying off and terminating employees. Who are they going to terminate? Not the assiduous hard workers, the quiet quitters. And down the line, they're going to want references, and they're not going to get good references because they weren't good employees. So they've got to be a little more far-sighted than the quiet quitters are right now.
Is this a generational thing too, an attitude shift with the generations?
I have some very hardworking young lawyers, and I have some more senior lawyers that don't work as hard.
Mm.
I will say that generally I find it generational. So there's exceptions, but yes, I think that people of our generation, my generation, when I started, I was writing a book, I was starting my law practice. I worked a regulated timetable that added up to 101 and a half hours a week, every week for 2.5 years without a break until my first edition, my first book was written. And I don't know anybody in the younger generation with that kind of dedication. Because I didn't know many people in my generation with that kind of dedication. But the point is, it wasn't as rare then as it is now.
And so, it's a couple of things. If I can distill what you're saying. First of all, it can be bad for the employee because if the dynamics of with a recession, the power balance changes, they could be the first on the block. But I think you're also alluding to the fact that an employee has to accumulate, a knowledge, experience, familiarity with the job to do. And if they're doing less of it, is that one of your points as well? If they're doing less of it, that's a problem as well.
Tony, I haven't said that. You just did, and I agree with you entirely. So let's turn that around. Yes, I agree with you entirely. Of course, if I'm going to hire a lawyer to work here, and of course it's true of every field, every profession, every vocation, then you want them to be good. And you're not good if you haven't worked very hard. I want someone who's with 5 years of experience, with 5 real years of experience, not 2 years of experience spread out into 5 years. I remember my first examination for discovery. I had the whatever kicked out of me a few times before I learned the skills. And that has to happen. You have to take some hard knocks and try and dig deeper and learn from it and work hard. And that's true for everybody, whether it's hard knocks or simply accumulated experience. If you're quietly quitting, you're not gathering that experience. You're not digging down to figure out how you can do it better. And therefore, A, you're not as valuable an acquisition. You're not going to be recruited. And secondly, when you take the new job, you're not going to be as good as they thought you were.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let me flip it around. Somebody watching our program, contemplating quiet quitting, what would your advice be to them?
Don't. You're selling yourself short. You're going to be punished for it down the line. You're going to be terminated. And then you're not going to get good references. And then you're not going to have the job skills to get other jobs. You're not going to have recruiters out there looking for you. Because even today, with a skill shortage, and maybe there's 20 jobs any one person can have, and I write all my response to demand letters from employees right now saying, right now on Indeed.ca today alone, there are 430 job applications or job advertisements for that particular position. They don't need more severance pay. That's today. But if there's 20 good jobs, they're not all the same.
Right.
And you want to get the best job, and that's going to be a function of your credentials. So develop those credentials. If you're young in your career and you're starting or you're changing careers, you're trying to learn and get into a field, eat it up. Don't avoid it.
We're going to continue our conversation with Howard Levitt of Levitt Sheikh Employment Law Firm after the break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. And we're back here at Boom Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Howard Levitt, senior partner at Levitt Sheikh Employment Law Firm. Howard, just want to expand it out. We were talking about quiet quitting for the last two segments. Obviously, this is, as you had said earlier, this is connected to the work from home phenomenon. So tell us a little bit about that other battle about getting people back into the office. Let's drill down a little bit on that.
Well, it's a legal battle, and of course, it's a marketplace battle. Employers want, in many cases, people to come back to the office because, frankly, most of the statistics show it's more productive if you're working in the office than at home. People working from home, actually, the stats show work a little bit longer, but not as productive per hour. Overall, the balance is in favor of working in the office. So employers are saying, and my clients are saying, I want my people back in the office. I want a team again. I want orientation and training. I want the exchange of ideas, and I want more productive work. And employers are saying, no, 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 I want to stay at home. And there's a risk for employers if you order them back, they'll quit and really quit, not just quietly quit.
Right.
So the question is, what's the law? The law is an employer has the right to require people to come back to the office, and if they say no, they've resigned, and that's the end of their employment with cause. But here's the trick. If they let this go on much longer, the employee can say, you could have called me back to the office, Mr. Employer, Mrs. Employer, a year ago. You didn't. I assumed working from home would become a fundamental term of my employment contract. And that tipping point is about now. Employers should better understand if they don't order them back now, they're going to lose the right to. And then employees can say, it's a term of my employment to work from home. I've been doing it now for 4 years, and it's a constructive dismissal if you make me. And therefore, it's as if you fired them. So that's a decision employers have to make. The only solution is for the employer who's not ready to call them back, but wants the right to in the future, is to have them sign contracts giving the employer the right to call them back at any time in the future on X months' notice.
Right. And are you seeing that now in employment law, that kind of contract?
Well, my clients are doing it because I'm telling them to do it.
Okay.
So yes, so I'm seeing it, yes. And employers are facing the conundrum of calling people back, but they have a right to call them back. It was always supposed to be temporary.
Yes, and so in order to collect on those rights, you kind of use it or lose it. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Now, the interesting thing about this is, and you referenced public sector employees earlier in our conversation, and I noted that there's another round of collective bargaining going on with the federal public service, and one of the things that they are trying to write into the next collective agreement is the right to work from home. So that's an interesting phenomenon, and it also means that there could be yet another differentiation. If they earn that right through collective bargaining, then public service is very different from the private sector employment space. So please comment on that.
Tony, one day there's going to be rebellion. I don't know why it hasn't already happened. We are using our tax dollars to pay people more than we're making ourselves. Not every person, but generally speaking. And their jobs are secure. There's no layoffs, and they have one benefit after another, this being merely another one. And at some point, employees are going to say, who are subject to layoff, are being laid off in recessionary times when all the public servants are keeping their jobs and making more than these people ever did for exactly the same functions. Enough's enough. And it's going to be a real issue where they're going to be lobbying the government extensively to take tougher positions at the bargaining table. Because if you're an employer and you have a little factory and you're unionized, The union knows if they push too hard, you'll go bankrupt and all their members will lose their jobs, and that'll be the end of that. So there's no market discipline in the federal public sector or the provincial public sector or any public sector. They could push and they push, and the politicians, their interest is not having a strike in their watch. And if they give too much money, well, the, the X won't hit the fan for another 5 years, and they'll be long out of office. So they don't really care. And as I say, there's no market discipline. So that's what I see. And it's simply a further differentiation that's going to really antagonize people. And I think that's what Pierre Poilievre is. I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but that's a little bit of what he's getting elected on.
Yeah,
I,
it's bubbling up there for sure. Sorry, I cut you off. Please continue.
that's what he's getting elected. That's what he got elected on, at least nominated on, and that's why there's so much fury in the land, and a lot of it is our tax dollars being dribbled away unnecessarily because there's no reason for public servants to earn more than private sector employees for the same jobs.
Right, right. Howard Levitt, we're going to have one more opportunity to discuss this in the next segment. We're going to take a brief break to thank our sponsors, and we'll be back after that. Please stay with us. We will return shortly. Thanks for joining us here at Boom and Bust. I'm here with Howard Levitt, senior partner at Levitt, Sheikh employment law firm. Howard, we were just discussing off air some of the other kind of trends that you're noticing in the employment law space. So let's talk about these wrongful dismissal cases. There's been an uptick in that, hasn't there?
Yes, Tony, when I started practice, it was anathema to sue your employer. You would never get another job. That's what people said, and it was true because no one sued their employer. And now you're thought of as an idiot if you don't sue your employer if you haven't paid enough wrongful dismissal damages. Like, it's de rigueur to do so. Everybody's suing, and all of these advertisements of free consultations, contingency fees, our radio shows, and otherwise is forcing people almost to think hard about whether or not they're going to take a free consultation, contingency fee that won't cost them anything, to get more money with no downside. Now, there is a downside, but people don't understand that. But the point is, everybody's running to lawyers, and most people are suing when they get fired. And it almost doesn't matter how much the employer pays because employees think, well, we'll get a little more. They're not going to not pay a little more to get resolution. So that's a big change. And it's been a gradual change over the years, but it's more so now than ever. And employers may think, well, I've got an employment contract, and that will prevent my being successfully sued. There's been a series of decisions, mostly the Ontario Court of Appeal, but not just the Ontario Court of Appeal, decisions in other provinces as well, that have invalidated virtually every employment contract out there. So
Really?
most employers should get their contracts renewed and not count at all on the contracts they have. So employees who are thinking, well, I have a contract limiting employment standards minimum, it probably doesn't. Or limiting 1 per year of service, it probably doesn't. Because there's so many ways the courts have invalidated employment contracts. I'd say 98% of employment contracts in Ontario specifically are unenforceable.
That's really interesting. And of course, I guess there's a human nature aspect to the judicial decisions in the sense that, sometimes we always want to be on the side of the little guy, that there's always deeper pockets on the employer's side. But it must be having a cumulative effect, though, right?
I'm waiting for the rotation to go back toward employers. And every year I wait, and every year I'm disappointed. It just isn't happening.
Mm.
The employee judgments are becoming more and more extreme every day. We used to have a few judges that were obviously on the employer side. I don't know who they are today. In other words, they don't exist today. And it starts with the Supreme Court of Canada, where I've been a number of times.
Right.
They say the role of the courts is to address the inherent imbalance of bargaining power between employees and employers. So judges, quite properly, take their lead from the Supreme Court rulings, saying exactly that.
Indeed. We've got about a minute and a half left. You've also noticed an uptick in unionization. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, with employees having bargaining power for the first time, and employers having a difficult time keeping their employees, and employees being rated, employers are being prepared to provide more money than they had before. employees are going to unions more than they had before, and unions are becoming much more aggressive in their demands. So I'm seeing a massive, and it is massive across the whole country, uptick in unionization compared to before, because that is an area where, from the time I started practicing law till today, unionization in the private sector has just plummeted and continues to plummet year after year until now.
And do you foresee that having an impact on prices and wages and that kind of thing?
Well, yes, if people have more money to spend and inflate, that's one of the factors of inflation.
Right.
It bids up the price of all commodities.
So, do you think that at the end of the day, this pendulum will swing back at some point?
I think when times are tough, it's going to swing back. It's going to continue to swing the way it is in terms of employees suing in the non-union sector for wrongful dismissal, because unionized employees, as you know, can't sue for wrongful dismissal. But I think the gravy of unions contracts and the gravy of unions suddenly being attractive to employees who are seeing especially mid managers and executives doing extremely well is going to end as soon as times are
Right.
tough and life start. Unions aren't
Howard,
going to be attractive.
Howard Levitt, our time is up, but I do want to thank you again for being on the program. Very interesting discussion on workplace dynamics.
Thank you, Tony.
Interesting discussion with Howard Levitt there. Lots happening in the workplace, and he's got a handle on it for sure. Thanks for watching today. We'll see you next time.